Hello, and welcome to the meeting. This meeting is now being recorded.
Hello and welcome to the Dog Show Mentor Interview. Today we host Jonathan David, who's going to share his secrets of how to choose the right scissors. I'm Lee Whittier, founder and host of Dog Show Mentor. Jonathan David is a world-renowned speaker, commentator, and grooming contest judge. He's been on television in America on shows such as Dogs 101, Animal Planet, Good Morning America, and The View. He's well sought after in education in his field, giving seminars all over the world. In fact, I met Jonathan in Korea while I was judging there. Jonathan has partnered with Kenshi Shears, the industry leader in high-quality grooming shears, to create his signature line of scissors called Lightning by Jonathan David. He also has a set of educational CDs and DVDs. Jonathan has been a breeder and exhibitor of the Biva Terrier and was pivotal in achieving AKC acceptance. Currently, Jonathan resides in Florida, where he owns and operates the Lap of Luxury Dog Spa, the most unique pet boutique of its kind. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Lee. It's my pleasure to be here.
And I'm going to turn the meeting over to you.
Okay, well, one of the great fortunes that I've had being in this industry is partnering with Kenshi Shears. As you mentioned, Kenshi is the leading manufacturer of high quality shears, and it really does make a difference when it comes to the overall finish that you're trying to achieve on a dog, whether it's a pet dog or one of your show prospects. So today's portion of the seminar is going to be basically about the different types of metals used in the shears, the different handle types, the different edges. And the reason why I put this together was actually when I started working with Kenshi at the grooming trade shows. We have these trade shows, and I was sort of bewildered at how I would go through and start talking about the products that we made and the different shears and the handles and the edges and the different types of assemblies and the different metals. And I would see this sort of glazed over blank look in people's eyes. And I would say, do you even know what I'm, talking about here? And most times the answer was no. And I realized that a lot of the groomers, either who went to a grooming school and didn't get a complete education, or they learned by apprenticing under, handlers and other groomers, they didn't get that type of an education. So they were sort of haphazardly purchasing shears. And we make so many different models in the grooming industry for different hands, for different functions, and with all the different breeds out there, especially, for your audience, people that are really looking to sort of have that edge over their competitor, part of it is going to be the groom. And so I want to sort of help everybody be equipped with the knowledge about the different scissors so that when they are ready to purchase a pair of shears for whatever breed it is that they're going to be grooming, they have a better understanding of the tools that they're using. And that's what we're going to go over today. So the very first slide we have here, and this is sort of an easy question a mystery to dispel, is that, scissors versus shears. Are they scissors or shears? Well, they're all types of scissors. Generally, though, in the industry, anything that is more than 6 inches in length, we refer to as a shear as opposed to a scissor. Now, there's all different types of metals used in manufacturing scissors, and there's 2 main ways that we make scissors, and that's either cast or forged. So cast scissors are liquid metals that are poured into a mold, and then they're assembled together. And those are typically your lower end shears. Those are the ones that are going to cost you in the range of anywhere from 15 to maybe 40 or $50. They usually come in a shrink wrap, bubble package, and they're hanging on pegboard somewhere. The problem with cast shears is there are imperfections in the metals. So liquid metal that's melted down, when it's poured into the mold, you don't know if all of the alloys are going to be in one concentrated area or if they're going to be dispersed evenly. There can also be air bubbles put into the metals, and if you were to drop your shears and then you just hit it on the right spot, you could actually break your scissors in half. If you're not doing a lot of grooming and you're just trimming around feet and things of that nature, then your lesser expensive shears would be fine for you. But if you're getting into breeds such as poodles and bichons and Kerry blues, and you're doing thinning shear work on some of the dogs, and you're going to really want a higher quality shear. So when we talk about the metals, the basic metals that we use in quality shears are Japanese steel. And everything that we blend in beyond that is to make the shears harder and stronger so you can put a finer edge, which we'll get into the other when I go over the edges. But basically, there's all different types of alloys, which are metals that are blended into the Japanese steel. And a lot of your higher end shears are going to have molybdenum, cobalt, and vanadium, which are much more strong alloys, but they do add cost to the shear because those are very lightweight, strong metals that cost a little bit more to manufacture. The steel usually is nickel and chromium plated to prevent rust and corrosion. And sometimes you can even see on some of them, if you see the shears that have like the pink colors or the iridescent colors or even black, those are plated, and that is just a titanium coating to seal the scissor in and give them that color. So we're going to move on to the next slide, and I'll go over the different metals in the charts. So if you look at the chart displayed here, the way we do it at Kenshi, and I think this is really helpful, but this is going to sort of parlay into all brands. But if you see how we broke it up into levels 1 through 5, 5 is really for the beauty industry, and we include it in this chart because we do beauty shears too. And some of our groomers will buy beauty shears, but they're usually smaller and they're a little bit more expensive. So we're going to look at levels 1 through 4. So all of your basic shears, level 1 is your standard Japanese steel shear, a high quality shear. You've got your carbon, your chromium, manganese, phosphorus, silicone, and sulfur. And as you get up into level 2s, you see that we add molybdenum. And when you get up into level 3s, it's the same metals. And then you'll see as we get up into a level 4, which is our highest level of shear, we add cobalt. So why would we add all of these alloys? What is the point? Well, when you want to sharpen your scissors to finer edges, your standard shear has a bevel edge, and we're going to get into the edges later, but if you want to get into your sharper edges to do really precision cutting and finish work, you have to blend in harder metals. And if you also look at the bottom, there's a line that says Rockwell. There's something called a Rockwell rating, and the Rockwell rating is how they determine the hardness of metal. So the way that they do the Rockwell rating is a sheet of metal is made. So when they decide that they're going to have shears for, let's say, a level 1 or a level 2 shear, they create the sheet of metal, and the shears which are forged are literally cut out with a wire, and they're hand forged, done by hand. So the Rockwell rating will test the hardness of the metal because you want a harder metal for those finer edges. And the way that they test it is they have this special machinery in which the sheet of metal is put down on the base, and they use a high pressure hydraulic, and it has sort of like a little metal BB, and the hydraulic will come shooting down and impact the sheet of metal. And depending upon the hardness of the metal is how deep the little BB will go into the metal. And that's how they determine the Rockwell rating. And that's how they look for perfection in the metal. So if it's supposed to have a higher Rockwell rating, but the BB does go in a lot deeper because it's a softer metal, then that sheet would not be used for those higher end shears. So that's how we determine the Rockwell rating. And this is just a chart to give you an idea of some of the different metals. And we're going to go on to the next chart, and I'm going to go a little bit more into detail. So if you look at our level 1, which is what your standard grooming shears are going to be with most of your brands, and those are generally going to be a bevel edge. The entry-level Japanese steel, it's got a good hardness, corrosion resistance, and it's able to keep a great edge. And it's going to have a Rockwell rating of 54 to 55. When you go up to level 2, it's got all those same strengths as the level 1, but it's got a little bit of an extra metal blended in, which is actually called molybdenum. And the molybdenum makes it just a little bit stronger, so it's going to get a little bit of a higher Rockwell rating. And we can do something on there called a fine bevel. It's a bevel edge, but it's a little bit sharper. When you get up into your level 3s, these are sort of what we consider a premium Japanese stainless steel. We add in molybdenum, and in some cases, sometimes we add in we add in molybdenum, and there can be cobalt in a level 3, but generally it's just the molybdenum. And you're going to see on your level 3s, most level 3 shears are going to be a semi-convex edge. So it's a little bit of a sharper, finer edge than your bevel edge, but it's not just a finishing shear. Level 3s are pretty much what I use for my everyday grooming. Level 3s are generally what you're going to see a lot of your competitive groomers using, and a lot of your show people who are grooming poodles and bichons and trying to get that really crisp finish on your dogs, because they're an everyday kind of a workhorse kind of a shear, as well as a beautiful finishing shear. Then when you get them into your level 4s, those are always going to have cobalt and vanadium, and that's for super strength and durability. So what that means is that it's going to last longer between sharpenings, but it's also such a hard metal that you can actually grind the edge down to a convex edge. And a convex edge is your sharpest, finest point, and that's primarily a finishing shear. If you were to, say, groom one of your curly-coated breeds, a water dog or a poodle or a bichon, you wouldn't want to carve out the coat with a convex shear and then finish with it. You certainly could. It would be a beautiful job, but you're going to dull your edge more quickly. So I generally reserve my convex edge shears for my finishing work. When I've carved out a dog, when I've done all of the basic grooming and I want to give it a nice crisp finish, when I want to remove any kind of marks from the scissor, I'll go in, because the convex edge is literally like with a carpenter when they just start finely sanding down to that really fine grain. That's what a convex is for. It's to give that really overall pop at the end. And so that's how those are our levels of our shears, and those are the different metals. So when you go and you're looking at shears and you see the different range of prices, you'll understand now why some of them are, in the 50, 75, $100 range, and some of them go up into the hundreds. It's because of the quality of the shears and the metal that goes into the manufacturing of them. So now let's go on to the next slide and get into some of the different types of handles and edges, so that you understand why we add in those alloys, so that you can really get these edges. So your basic handle that you're going to see on a grooming shear is your even handle. And what that means is that the blade of the scissor is in the center, and the finger and the thumb holes are going to be a perfect V out from the center of the scissor. That's going to be your most common scissor type. Even handles, some people are very comfortable with them. Pretty much all of your scissors that you want to be able to flip over, like some of your curves, to do curves in either direction, they're always going to be even handled. The next most popular is called offset. And an offset has the cutting blade on one plane and the other blade off at an angle with the thumb hole. So you're going to see that when you hold a scissor in your hand, when you have your fingers lined up and you've got your pinky on the pinky rest, the blade is going to go straight out to one side, and then the thumb hole is going to be up offset at a little bit of an angle. And the advantage of this is that some people find this to be a little bit more comfortable in their hand. It could be more ergonomically correct for certain people's hands, especially if they have longer fingers. So that's called offset, and that's your second most common type. Another popular type is called swivel, and that's one of the newer types. And if you look at the picture on the right, the swivel handles actually have a screw that holds the thumb hole on, and you can actually leave that loose where you can, as you move the scissor around and you rotate the scissor, the thumb hole actually swivels around that pivot point. Some people like that, or you can actually twist the thumb hole to customize a fit, and where it feels right on your hand, you can tighten the screw and you can actually customize the feel of the shear. And you'll also notice that in the swivel type, if you look at the shank, now the shank is the part of the shear between where it's screwed together and the finger holes. The shank on the even and the offset is just a smooth plane, whereas on the swivel, you see that little point. It's sort of like a scallop. And that's called a crane handle. And the reason for the crane handle is it actually places your fingers in all of the correct positions. So your pinky will be on the pinky rest, your ring finger would be in the finger hole, your middle finger would be in that first scallop, and your index finger would be on the next scallop. And so there's no advantage to one over the other specifically, other than there's many different hands out there. Some are wider, some have little narrow fingers, some have wider fingers. So depending upon the build of your hand, we make many of the similar models of shears with the same blade, but yet very different handles and finger holes. And it's just to accommodate the many different types of hands that are out there. And so those are going to be like your basic handle types. And it's amazing to me how many people actually hold scissors wrong. And so I just want to kind of go over that. If you look at the anatomy of that shank in the finger hole, that little point that hangs off the tip of the finger hole, that is called a pinky rest. That is where your pinky goes. Then your ring finger will go in that next hole next to it. Your middle finger and your index finger wrap around the scissor to support it. And you would be surprised at how many people actually put their middle finger in that finger hole and they put their ring finger on the pinky rest, and then their pinky is just way out there in space by itself with nowhere to rest. And the reason why we need that pinky rest is you help support the shear. It gives a little leverage. So the more support you have of the shear, the less you're going to bounce with the tips of your shear. And this is especially important for people who are doing scissoring, such as your curly coated breeds. So that's those three handle types. And now we're going to move into the different edges. Next slide. So when I was talking about the different edges, the bevel, the semi-convex, and the convex, if you were to cut a scissor blade right off in half and look straight on down the front of the scissor, the way you would down the barrel of a gun, you would see these edges on your scissors. So bevel edge, the first one in the first circle on the left, that is your standard shear. And you can see that there's a slight plane and then it drops off to a point, and that is your basic cutting edge, okay? So when a sharpener sharpens the scissors, and if they're a skilled sharpener, now mind you, somebody who sharpens kitchen cutlery and kitchen knives is not the same person you would bring your high-end shears to, because people who sharpen high-end shears for cutting human and animal hair, those shears have very specific edges, and that training to get those edges is an art form. It's a skill, just as grooming is, just as any other trade. And you certainly wouldn't want to entrust your precious tools in the hands of someone who doesn't know, because if they put the wrong edge on, they can ruin the scissors for the life of the shear. So that's your bevel edge. It's your standard grooming shear. The next one is your semi-convex. And if you look at the semi-convex, you can see it's very similar to the bevel, except it comes to a much finer point. There's a much steeper plane down the side of the edge of the scissor, and then it comes to a small notch at the point, and that is called a semi-convex. And semi-convex is going to be one of your most popular high-end shears because it can work through the coat very similar to a bevel edge, but you can get a much crisper, cleaner finish on your scissoring when you use a semi-convex. And then if you look at the picture all the way on the right, you've got the convex edge, and that is a true point. That comes down to a true point. And this goes back to what I was talking about with blending in the stronger alloys, because you can see the distance from the bottom to the top of the scissor on a bevel edge versus on a convex edge. If you weren't using a harder, strong metal and you put that fine convex edge on the edge of a softer metal shear, it's not going to hold up for as long. It'll cut initially, but it's not going to hold its edge for a very long time between sharpenings. And if you were to drop your shears or bang them against your comb by accident, you have a higher chance of nicking the edge of your blade on one of the lower Rockwell rated metals. So if you look in the text below the pictures, at the very bottom, there's also something that says serrated edge. So serrations are along the opposite to the cutting blade. Okay, that is the blade that actually will hold the hair in place. And what a lot of the models do, and I actually have this done on my shears, is we put what's called a micro serration. And what they are is, if you were to hold the scissor up to a bright light, along the edge of the hone line there on the edge of the metal blade, you would see little teeny tiny lines, and those are called serrations. And the point of those are, when you close the scissor against the hair, those little lines grip the hair and hold the hair in place, so the cutting edge can swipe along the hair and give you a nice, crisp, clean cut. So I don't know if any of your listeners have ever had this experience with their scissors, but they go to cut some hair, and as you close the scissor, the hair sort of pushes away from the edge of the blade. And we call that pushing hair. And that can be a sign of two things. Number one, your scissors could be a little bit dull. But sometimes on your dense coat, if you're not using the right type of an edge, if you're using a bevel edge on a really dense coat, you might need to switch to a semi-convex or something with micro serrations to hold that hair into place, because that's going to give you that little extra edge when you're doing the cutting. So those are our types of edges, and that's why it's so important when you are shopping for shears, or when you are learning about grooming, and even if you only have one breed and that's the only breed you're ever going to groom, to know that you're getting the best quality shear for that coat type is going to give you that edge. Because while certainly the conformation ring should be all about conformation, we do want to make our dogs look very flashy. And we also can use grooming to hide some of our dogs' faults. And so if you can achieve better grooming with better shears, then you already are at an advantage over maybe your competitor. So those are our basic straight and curved types of edges. I want to get into the next topic, which is going to be the thinning shears. So if you look at our next slide, the thinning shears come in a variety of teeth and a variety of lengths and a variety of types. And thinning shears is something that I am most known for. It's one of my educational videos. It's called Thinners 101, and I do entire haircuts with just thinning shears. And it's something that thinning shears were used at one time just for detail work and maybe debulking, but thinning shears have come quite a long way as far as manufacturing and the different options in them. And in my opinion, I think they're one of the most useful tools that you can use when grooming various breeds, from curly coats straight down to your drop coats, your pet trims, and even some of your, texturizing on some of your terriers. Like you have your hand strip terriers that should be pulled, but we all know that some of the terriers, certain areas are a little bit more sensitive, or certain areas we do use thinning shears on, like on Australian terriers, the top of their head gets trimmed. So you might want to create a little bit of texture with some thinning shears. So thinning shears can be many varieties of teeth, and there's double-sided thinners, there are detail thinners, and there are blenders. And I'm just going to kind of give you a little explanation of those. So a basic thinning shear is going to have at least 30 teeth or more, and they're going to be tight together, not a lot of space between the teeth, and they generally have a flat, what we call a V notch at the tip of each tooth. And it looks flat, but if you look really closely, there's a teeny tiny little V in each tooth. And that's your standard thinning shear. It's got a cutting blade on one side, the teeth on the other, A lot of teeth close together is detail-oriented work. It's not going to take off a lot of coat, and it's not going to leave lines in the coat. I like to use those for cleaning up around eyes, visors, ear edges, or for blending for on various breeds. Then we have double-sided thinners, and that's where instead of having a cutting blade on one side and teeth on the other, there's teeth on both sides. This is for absolute seamless cutting. They will leave no lines. They take off a very minimal amount of hair. A lot of people like to use these on a lot of your smooth coat dogs. So a lot of people don't think about smooth coat dogs getting a lot of grooming, but if you've ever been to a dog show or if you exhibit some of your smooth coat breeds, you will know that there is actually quite a bit of detail work because you want to create really clean profiles. So let's say around the neckline where you have one growth pattern down the throat, and then where the side of the neck meets that, you generally have hair growing in different directions. And when that comes together, you get a little bit of a ridge. And when you're showing a dog and you want to show off a really elegant neckline, or if you want to kind of square off your dog and shorten it up, you want to make your outside lines clean and smooth. So a lot of people use double-sided thinners along that cowlick line where smooth-coated breeds, where their hair comes together, and just to bring that down and smooth that out. Also, same on the rear, just below the rectum, just before where the leg starts. A lot of times there's a little swirl of hair there, and there's sometimes some straight hairs that come off in the back of the angulation. And you want to really show off that angulation in some of your breeds, so you might want to take a double-sided thinner and go into those hairs and really smooth that out and bring that down. It gives a very natural look, so it doesn't look over-groomed, so you don't get faulted for that, but it does help clean up the outside lines of the dog. And then you're going to see blenders. Blenders are a much more aggressive style of thinners. Those generally have spacing between each of the teeth. Generally, almost every other tooth is sort of what would be a space. And the tops of each one of those teeth will have multiple serrations, so it's going to cut a tremendous amount of hair. We use blenders for debulking. We use them for top scissoring over curly coats to remove any scissor marks to give it a softer look. Sometimes like on your Irish Water Spaniels, Portuguese Water Dogs, where you've got more of a wavy coat than a curly coat, it's a useful tool for blending your lines and creating softer lines, so it gives it a more natural, not so crisp and over-groomed kind of a look. It's also very useful for some of your bigger hairy dogs that you are no longer showing and you're cutting down into more manageable pet trims. It's a great option for giving those pet trim type looking styles where a lot of our bigger dogs that no longer get hand stripped or no longer get carded and they start getting clippered. This is a useful blending tool for those types of things. So those are what you're gonna see mostly in your thinners. Another one you hear of is called chunkers, and a lot of times people misuse that term. They confuse blenders and chunkers. So chunkers, literally every other tooth would be missing where you would see a notch come out of the coat when you cut with it. I use chunkers for my big, hairy, doodly kind of dogs, for my Briards, for my sheepdogs that are in pet trims. If I'm going into one of your heavy working breeds, such as, let's say, Bernese Mountain Dogs, or if you've got, retrievers, even some of your sporting breeds where you want to really go in and debulk some of that hair behind the ear to make the whole headset pop out, you can use a chunker to go in there and take some of that bulky coat out. So they do leave a lot of lines. They're generally large teeth that will leave marks in coats. Not really thinning shear for detail work. It's a great texturizer for terriers if you're no longer hand stripping and you want to create the illusion of that textured coat still. You can use a chunker or a blender to go in there and really give that kind of scrappy terrier look on some of your pet dogs or retired dogs. So that's the basic understanding of the types of metals, the edges, and the handles of grooming shears. And that's the beginning of learning about scissors. So that's the first part of this series, and I hope that this information provided to you gives you a better understanding of the tools and why some of them cost a little bit more.
Jonathan, this has been a great introduction. I learned a lot here, and I just have a question about this slide. And you talk about the different models of the Kenshi. Are these um, each different uh, type of blade has several different models?
Okay, so when I talk about the different edges um, on the shears, there are different models that have different edges for pretty much so that people understand. We give a name to every model so that they can kind of shop for what they want. But your bevel edge is going to be your standard grooming shear, and there's a lot of great models out there. A lot of our entry level people who are just coming out of the industry. Why I like bevel edge for beginners is because beginners tend to, as they until they develop their scissoring skills, they'll sometimes, as they're using the comb, close the scissor on the comb accidentally, or they may accidentally pinch the dog with the scissor, or they may drop the scissor. And a bevel edge is a little bit more durable. So a lot of the models, such as the flippers, the scorpions, some of those entry level models, those are really great for people who are a little rough with their scissors. But if you're getting into more fine scissor work, semi-convex and your convex edges are going to be on your higher end models like my signature line, like some of the other signature lines, or flames or bumblebees. We make one called a pink poodle that was actually designed with input from the Poodle Club of America, because they wanted specific features of the thinning shear and the scissor itself to accommodate the types of grooming that they do. The owner of Kenshi is actually a show person. He breeds and shows Great Danes, and he owns a couple of other of the large working breeds. But he started in the beauty industry, and always had a passion for dog showing from the time he was a child, and he really wanted to bring the philosophies of the beauty industry shears, which have been around for far longer, and they have, far pricier and different types of shears. And he started bringing the philosophies of the beauty industry into the grooming industry shears, and it was something that hadn't really been done before, and that's why they're sort of one of the leaders in the industry. And we've created edges that nobody else has. We've created handles that nobody else has. Um, and we're working on a couple of special little items coming up. So when it comes to the different models and the different edges for different hands, a lot of our blades on the scissors are similar from one model to the next, but very different handles because of the types of handles, the types of hands that are using them. So what I encourage people to do is, whether you're a groomer or not, go to the grooming shows, because and there's grooming shows all over the country. And Lee, you personally witnessed it yourself. You visited Shannon and I at one of our grooming shows, and you got to see what I'm talking about. But a lot of the scissor companies will put their scissors out on display for you to pick up and hold. Same thing with dog shows. You go to a lot of the dog shows, and a lot of the distributors will have pairs out for you to pick up and try. Don't be afraid to bring a little piece of hair with you and give it a try on some, snippets of hair that you've brought from your dog, to see if that is the right shear for you, because it's an investment. I've had some of my shears for I was using Kenshi when I was a grooming competitor, so I've had my Shinobi line for 11 years, and I'm still using them as part of my everyday shears in my shop now. But 11 years to have a shear that long, if you take good care of a high quality shear and you get them sharpened by somebody who knows what they're doing, and you store them properly and you keep them in good condition, it's an investment for a very, very long time to come. So the price for the shear really doesn't come out to so much when you think about when you're purchasing really low end shears and you have to replace them and over sharpen them because they can't hold their edge. You end up spending more money in the long run on the cheap shears than you would on buying one pair of good shears.
Yeah, well, it was interesting to hear you talk about the different metals, and I'm really looking forward to part two of this, so that we can learn more about your secrets in finding the right shears. So thank you, Jonathan. We're going to close. This is the end of part 1, and we'll be on to part 2. Bye for now.
Bye.